Hi, everybody. This is Vo with the Hispanic Chamber. I'm here with Marisol Rubio. She's candidate for California State Senate District 7. Marisol, thank you for joining us here. And tell us, who are you and what's going on with this race?
Well, as you mentioned, I am Marisol Rubio, and I'm running for state senate because for the past 23 years, I have experienced firsthand many challenges that we are facing within our healthcare and educational system as a single mom of a disabled child with chronic illness. And she's also a brain cancer survivor, so she had many issues to contend with, and that I had to advocate for her on behalf of her education as well as her healthcare and make sure that her needs were being met successfully. But I've also, over time, become involved in politics and have become very passionate about other issues such as the environment. As a scientist with a neurobiology background, that is extremely important to me to make sure that we are protecting our environment for the next generation. And also in terms of addressing social issues, talking about housing, whether we're talking about criminal justice reform, those types of issues are very important to me as well, because I believe that a society, a community does not exist in isolation, and therefore the more we can lift people, the better a society as a whole will be.
Interesting. So you're coming off right off the bat like a people's type of politician, right? Not the typical one here. So tell us about your platform and kind of what's driving that. What's Marisol all about?
Well, first and foremost, in terms of healthcare and education, I want to make sure that people are able to access those services without any hindrance. I also want to make sure, and without going bankrupt, quite frankly. We have student loan debt that exceeds our credit debt, which is quite frightening. And I also want to make sure that we also invest in training people for the 21st century jobs. There's a lot of, our blue-collar workers who may need, education to update their skills to the current needs of our society. That should be something they can access without having to have financial setbacks, and also not, most people have families, and we got to make sure to support them in that process. So basically, also in terms of housing, making sure that we're developing housing near places where people work, and also making sure that it's near public transportation if they have to commute to work. I think that, again, going back to the concept of building community, we have to understand that we want the people who serve us, the people who care for our children, those people should be part of our community. They should be our neighbors, not strangers. So that's extremely important to me. And in terms of the environment, I want to make sure that we do everything possible to protect our environment for the next generation by making sure that we definitely don't allow the current presidential administration to drill in Mount Diablo. That's definitely a no-no on my book, and I hope I will do everything possible to stop that. And find other ways, alternative forms of energy, to make sure we're using renewable energy, tapping into that resource, and as well as there are many great ideas out there about how we can, in terms of now, especially that we're focusing on housing and building. There's so many wonderful ideas about how we can use materials that are already existing and that we consider waste that could actually go into building these new homes, and they would be completely just as effective as cutting more trees down. So a lot of things we can do in terms of that issue. So.
Wow, so that's a pretty well-rounded platform there. Clearly you're a conscientious member here of our local community who wants to see it get better. So kind of walk us through a little bit through this role of this Senate seat that you're going for. So how many seats are available? What's your district all about? What's your district comprised of? Which areas here? What are we talking about?
So I am in District 7, and the bulk of it is Contra Costa County, excluding Richmond, and some parts of the small part of segment of kind of like Pleasant Hill, Concord area. And it's also Tri-Valley, which includes Pleasanton, Livermore, and Dublin. And in terms of the demographics of it, it's quite a mixed socioeconomic population, and also culturally mixed. The needs are very diverse, and I think it's extremely important for whoever is running to represent District 7 to understand the issues that are affecting all of our cities, which including Antioch and Pittsburgh, as well as the difference needs that, say, for example, might exist in Orinda, Moraga, or Walnut Creek, right, or San Ramon, Danville, and versus Tri-Valley as well, which is completely different. So I would really say there's almost three very distinct demographics kind of coexisting in this district.
So now, as we kind of unpack some of the issues here, now you're in essence one vote among many seats, and so obviously having your ideology aligned with the community is very important. And when we're considering how these bills kind of get moved through this process, where does the whole Senate role fit into all this?
So first and foremost, kind of going back a little bit to your other question earlier, there are 40 Senate seats. Right now, 14 are held by women. And in terms of the actual state legislature, Senate, it's 1/3 is constituted by women. So we still have a lot of work to do on that front in terms of making sure that we have proper representation. Also, in terms of introducing a bill, obviously, it is extremely important to be well informed about who you're voting for, whether it's for your assembly person or your state senator, because these are the people who will eventually are responsible for making sure to process bills that are affecting the community, that the community wants to introduce and bring forward to the assembly or the Senate.
So people can go straight to you?
Yes. Yes, they can contact my office.
So there you guys have it, folks. So as you're developing concerns in the community about what you'd like to see go into legislation, you can approach it at the local city level, and then it can be addressed at the assembly, and then also it eventually has to go through the Senate as well, and people can go directly to you. Is that the case?
Well, they can definitely contact my office at any time, and if they have a bill or a specific issue they'd like to address, my office would always be accessible to the people, and I will help them to try to present those bills to the best of my ability. Absolutely. So at the end of the day, there is a lengthy process that they have to go through. But yes, they can contact whether it's your state senator or it's your assembly person or your city council member. Obviously, it would be more efficient to kind of think, is it something more local or is it something more statewide? Then that would be the much more efficient, effective way to approach it as well.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And so what are some of the top issues that you'd like to, in essence, maybe see get some traction? Anything that you'd like to author personally?
Oh, personally, definitely. There's, as I mentioned from the outset, having been for the past 23 years a single mom of a disabled child, I have seen firsthand that there are a number of services, both in schools and social services, that are missing, that kids with different learning abilities are not getting adequate support at the schools, because most of these services are understaffed and underfunded. And one of the things as a state senator that I will prioritize first and foremost is making sure that we reinvest back into our schools, make sure that we reinvest into our teachers and making sure to raise their salaries so that they can live in California. We want to retain talent here in California. And in order to do that, we have to pay them a livable wage so they can stay here. I also want to invest into incentivize people to go into key fields such as healthcare, education, and incentivize those people to go into these sectors that are obviously experiencing a deficiency in services by perhaps providing scholarships and free college education, essentially, for them to be able to go into those careers without incurring debt.
And so tell us about the kind of the socioeconomic aspects of this region that you're looking to come into leadership in. Anything on the business front that you'd like to kind of drive some initiatives on?
Well, first and foremost, I think one of the things that we're seeing happening in California a lot is there are a lot of the gap between like these larger corporations and, say, for example, everyday people or the small business owner. They're not getting a fair shake here, and they're being outcompeted by large business corporations like Amazon, for example, where they just cannot provide those competitive prices and keep their doors open. So I definitely want to make sure that we continue to invest in small businesses. They are the heart of our communities again. This is at the core of my campaign, is building communities. So yes, I will do everything possible to support our small business owners and make sure that they are able to sustain their businesses and provide for their employees what they need and support them in that process. And one of the things I also would like to do, especially from the healthcare standpoint, I would like to expand the Affordable Care Act to people who with higher level incomes than where we have it set right now, make it more affordable, so that some of this burden, say, for smaller businesses that don't quite have as many resources to pay for private insurances can get some leverage in that regard. And incentivize, perhaps. I mean, ideally, a lot of the research has shown that obviously, if we went into a more universal health care, that would actually save businesses 8% by simply, and the cost to afford that simply requires a 1% tax increase on the top corporations only. And so that's a net gain of 7%. And that, for example, would really help these small businesses, because that's saving them, $5,500 per employee, that they no longer have to bear that burden as a small business owner. So it's actually really smart business to do that.
Excellent. And so how are we challenged right now in the community with regard to getting some of that stuff done? I mean, we have an incumbent right now that's going to be running again for the seat, potentially. Is that known already?
Yes.
Okay.
He is definitely running for his seat again.
Okay. And so what are some of the things that you'd like to change in this administration as a new senator?
Oh, one for sure. Just recently, he voted down AB 1505 and 1507, which was really set in place to try to provide some more oversight and accountability with charter schools, because it was a very deregulated process where they were being allowed to build pretty much wherever they chose to, and the local school districts were not able to have a fixed influence on that in terms of and say, for example, the local school district denied an application to build from a charter school. The charter school could go to the county and then have that overridden. But the county doesn't understand at a local level what are the needs of the community. The local school district is better positioned to do that. So that is one of the issues with that, as well as the fact that there was there was an independent research organization that looked into the accountability process, and charter schools were receiving $48 million, of which over 2/3 were unaccounted for. Nobody knows how they were being spent. That federal money was being spent. And then on top of that, they also were taking a low enrollment of high need students. So now you've just basically taken money away from our local school districts and basically flooded their student body with students who have high needs, which are obviously more cost. So they're getting a sort of squeeze from both sides. So I think that was a very poor decision on his end. And And also in terms of pharmaceutical drug prices, there was a bill that was presented on that, and he also voted that down. And for me, as a person who has spent 23 years of my life caring for someone who's a brain cancer survivor, I just can't fathom why anyone would turn a bill down that would make it more affordable for people to buy their medications that they direly need, especially as our cost of living is going up in California. We definitely need to help wherever we can. I mean, someone should not have to decide between their medication and paying their rent. So that's a major concern.
And so from a qualifications standpoint, how do you see yourself being the shoe-in here for this position? Now, we have an incumbent that has kind of a long-standing, I guess, position here in the community. And so from your perspective, has that been an effective track record, and how are you going to be better?
Well, first and foremost, I do have lived experience in a lot of these issues, whether I'm talking about housing. I am a person who is renting myself. I've seen my rent go up $600 a month in the last 15 months. And again, as being a single mom, caring for someone who's disabled, that's difficult to adjust to. As well as, like I said, in terms of the education and not getting the services that she needed, making sure that kids, regardless of what their learning styles are or their abilities are, making sure we capture all of our kids, that are, whether they have the high-functioning autistic students or ADD or ADHD. We need to create classrooms that are conducive to their way of learning and support them in that. We don't want to lose them. So we want to capture them early and make sure we keep them engaged. And also from the healthcare standpoint, just making sure that my daughter, when she had to seek help, when she was going through her cancer treatment, incurred $2 million in medical expenses, of which there were over $30,000 of out-of-pocket expenses for me. So things like that can really set somebody back. And we, as a society, really have to be sensitive to that, because it is in our common interest to make sure that we tap into every single individual's abilities and get them engaged in our society, make sure they are able to continue to function and have the same opportunities to upward mobility. As far as my qualifications, I have spent all of my life having to advocate on behalf of my daughter and write several letters, whether it was me as a college student having to go appeal to the school or to an instructor, my daughter's in the emergency room, what have you, so many things that really could happen on any given day, having to respond to that, having to appeal for that. Today I am the co-chair for the Issues Committee at the Democratic Party of Contra Costa County. And while being there, I have co-authored a couple of bills, and one which called for a charter school statewide moratorium on charter school expansion until the research issued by Governor Newsom and our California Superintendent Tony Thurmond can better inform our policies and accountability process for charter schools. And that was actually not only adopted by the California Democratic Party, but it was prioritized among the top 3 issues that we are going to deal with. And as well as, while being in the Issues Committee, I have helped pass through a couple of bills that had to do environmental bills, as well as public banking, which is we know is very, very smart biz. In terms of talking right now, especially with the housing crisis and talking about businesses and building community and things like that, this is really wonderful way to provide funding. Without competing with private banks. They do not compete with private banks. It's completely separate. They fill a need for local communities to help build the infrastructure. This is super important, especially, like I said, when we talk about Antioch, we talk about Pittsburgh, we talk about Brentwood, these cities that really are kind of needing to really build internally and build their economies. So there's a lot of bills that we've put through. They're very progressive bills, but they are bills that are built for the 21st century. We have to begin addressing our social issues in the 21st century, not 20 years ago. This is a very different society, and we have to use the science that we have, use the data and the resources that we have today to inform our policies, and also definitely talk to the community, talk to the people. They're the ones who know. And I think what makes me a very different candidate is that I'm not a politician. My career is not a political career. I am coming as a person who has lived experience, who understands fundamentally, firsthand, the issues that affect us, social issues that affect us in terms of access to housing, access to education, access to health care, and from a scientific standpoint, understanding how the environment is so critical to us as a society, and we must protect it at all costs. We have that 12-year span to make sure that we do not, cross that limit of 1.5 Celsius, or we will face severe consequences. So.
Interesting. So I'm sensing like you have your finger on the pulse of the community, and there's quite a bit of empathy. So tell us something about your background, education. What have you been doing all this time?
So I actually have been in the past. I've done anything from doing some neurobiology research. I've done research as well in like calculus and also in cystic fibrosis, because I have a science background. As I said, I studied molecular cell biology with an emphasis in neurobiology at Berkeley.
You studied what was it?
Molecular and cell biology with an with an emphasis in neurobiology, and then in the meantime, I have worked in a variety of fields. I spearheaded actually a couple of divisions within the Biology Scholars Program. I spearheaded the Health Promotion Program. I also worked at the Disabled Students Program, where I spearheaded a peer advisor program to try to provide some social support for students who had disabilities on campus. Since then, I've been a field organizer in Berkeley, as well as in San Ramon and in Oakland. And I've also been volunteered. I volunteered for 6 years at my local church, where I was the president of the pastoral council and helped organize all of our committees and our councils there, about 6 of them, in fact. And I also have been volunteering since 2006 as a guest speaker for the FACES pre-medical program, and where I talk about patient-centered care and family-centered care and the importance of that, and making sure that we support the caregivers is so critical to the well-being and the quality of care that someone who is incapacitated will receive. It's really vital, and we underestimate that. In fact, it's so vital. They did a study recently in 2016, 2017, where they studied 103 deaths of people who had disabilities, and of those 103, 13 were due to negligence. So there's a problem, and we need to make sure to address that. In a society like ours, I think we are duly obligated on a moral and ethical basis to make sure we protect our most vulnerable, whether that's our children, whether that's the elderly, or the disabled.
That's amazing. So, you're out of the gate kind of early with your campaign. We're kind of still kind of chugging through 2019, and so tell us, how's your campaign going? What do you have going on in that regard? Who's supporting you?
Well, it's right now. I have a lot of support right now from my immediate local community, of course. There are some organizations that are expressing interest, and I will make more evident that at a later date when everything's finalized. But I do have the endorsement of a couple of people as well that from within the educational sector, and again, I will also announce.
It's still a little early, yes. So she's not going to give us any clues just yet. It's a A little early to let the cat out of the bag, right?
It's a little early, but I also want to be, mindful that I don't, I'd rather just kind of, there's a right time and place for all of that. And right now, I really want to focus on connecting with people and making sure people know who I am, why I'm running, and that my passion, my motivation is internal. It's passion, the passion I have to make sure that we create opportunity in California again. I recently looked at the U.S. News, and California ranked 42nd in our nation in terms of opportunity. That has to change. That really has to change. It says a lot about how we're structured systematically right now, and we have to make sure to address those issues with urgency. I mean, all of those issues go back to the most critical things that we're facing right now in terms of, for example, housing. That goes back to opportunity. In order for people to make wages that are livable wages, they need to have access to opportunity without going bankrupt, right? So, yeah.
And what you do impacts the entire state in terms of your role in the Senate.
Absolutely.
And so clearly you're kind of coming from the heart, and you've got the brains to do this. And so we wish you the best of luck, Marisol. And so anybody wanting to get in touch with you, how do they do that? How do they get involved? Some people that want to support you, how does that work?
Well, first and foremost, please go to my website at marisol4ca.com. That is MARISOL 4ca.com. There they can sign up to volunteer or to get updates about my campaign. And I would love to hear from you. Please, you will have access to an email where you can send me any of your questions or concerns. And yes, please, I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Excellent. So there you guys have it, folks. Marisol Rubio, candidate for California Senate District 7. Thank you very much, Marisol.